Hello, everyone, and welcome to my presentation on Chapter 39, Equity and Excellence, Culturally Diverse Students in Gifted Education by Donna Y. Ford. This article discusses one of the major problems in gifted education, which is that there's been a steady trend of underrepresentation of diverse students in gifted programs, specifically with African Americans, Hispanic Americans, and Native Americans. It's hard to decide what's worse, the fact that the underrepresentation even exists, or the fact that there's been an awareness of this underrepresentation for decades, and it continues to exist. So that brings us to our author, Dr. Donna Y. Ford, who seeks to try to explain why and what we can do about it. While it's widely believed that assessments and testing are to blame for the underrepresentation, Ford actually believes that issues with assessment and testing are really just symptoms of the greater problem. There are two central issues of underrepresentation that Ford breaks down for us in this reading. The first is deficit perspective and the debate between excellence and equity. And then the second is educators and their lack of understanding of cultural diversity. When we're talking about the equity versus excellence debate, the real question here is, will gifted education programs lack in excellence with an increase in equity? Or as I wrote here, it's often debated that equity would depreciate the excellence for fear that underachieving gifted students would cause gifted programs to be watered down. But Ford absolutely dismisses this argument as inferiority beliefs and deficit thinking. Deficit thinking, also known as deficit orientation, is basically just a focus on the deficits and inadequacies of students. So teachers may hear their students speaking in non-standard English and consider that as being a deficit, when in reality, this could be a byproduct of the student's culture. Deficit thinking is tied to the emphasis on assessment and IQ score, in that students who get lower IQ scores are seen as having deficits. And there's no consideration of what talents and gifts they may have outside of that score. Some examples of cultural strengths of African American students are that they are more verbal and vocal, physically active, creative and expressive individualism. They build really strong social bonds, and they're more affective and emotional. I think it's important for us to stop and think about the concept that giving all students access to the same assessment is not equitable. To the left, we see equality, giving 3 different people the exact same accommodation in order to see the soccer game. To the right, we see equity. That is providing each individual with the proper accommodation for their needs. Ford stated in this article, or in this chapter, that one instrument must not dictate our decision making. This practice misuses or abuses the test and the integrity of the assessment process. How might educators misunderstand culturally diverse gifted behaviors? Well, one characteristic of giftedness is to seek cause and effect relations. Now, a manifestation of this particular characteristic through a cultural filter might be that the student sees things that others do not. He or she is insightful and perceptive, and he or she might ask a lot of why questions and why not questions. However, teachers interpret this behavior as being rude, stubborn, arrogant, and too demanding, and completely miss that characteristic of giftedness in that student. Likewise, a creative, inventive, and divergent thinker might be misunderstood as being just disruptive, troublemaker, class clown, non-conforming, weird, and indecisive. So here's another example of a gifted behavior and then how a teacher might misinterpret it. Intense concentration, student that doesn't like schedules, doesn't like to be disturbed. The teacher sees stubborn and single-mindedness and a disorganized student. A student with a strong sense of humor that likes to play with words and ideas and uses humor to improve social situations might be misunderstood as being cruel, sarcastic, insensitive, class clown, and attention seeker. So now that we've seen the role that educators play in the underrepresentation of culturally diverse students in gifted education, let's take a quick look at assessment. It's no surprise that test scores dominate gifted placement. So here I've put a few pieces of information about that. First of all, more than 90% of school districts use intelligence or achievement tests for placement. Furthermore, teachers and administrators believe tests are objective, which is kind of an excuse that they're able to hide behind when explaining why there's underrepresentation of culturally diverse students. And then Black and Hispanic students score one deviation below white students on standardized intelligence tests. This high emphasis for using assessments to determine giftedness creates a concept that giftedness is unidimensional or one-dimensional and can really only be measured by, say, IQ scores or achievement tests and grades, or even teacher referrals, which tend to be based on how a student is performing in their class. Ford proposes that in all of these circumstances, culturally diverse students' strengths are being ignored. And we forget that gifted students can be underachievers. So to rely on achievement tests doesn't quite consider gifted students who are lacking motivation at that time. The National Association for Gifted Children urges teachers to utilize more than one assessment to make placement decisions. Now, it's important for us to remember that while assessments are a large part of the problem, they're not the root of the problem. Ford emphasizes that deficit thinking and the debate between equity and excellence, as well as the problem with educators lacking understanding of cultural diversity, are really the two main problems that we're facing. So now let's take a look at some of the proposed solutions. First, teachers must discard deficit thinking. Then we need to redefine giftedness as a broader social and relative construct and develop proper measures and appropriate instruments for assessment. We need to consider theories that capture the strengths of culturally diverse students. For example, Sternberg's triarchic theory of intelligence, as well as Gardner's theory of multiple intelligences. We also need to consider using culturally sensitive instruments. There are nonverbal intelligence tests that actually have been proven to qualify more culturally diverse students, and they're actually better indicators of gifted potential than assessments of just acquired knowledge. Our fifth step is to identify and serve underachievers. That means in our classrooms, we need to consider implementing some of these strategies that I've outlined on this chart here in order to help underachievers and boost their motivation. Another important solution is to provide multicultural education. This means preparing teachers for multicultural education, using multicultural books, focusing on multicultural themes, allowing students to view concepts and issues and events from the perspectives of other cultural groups, encouraging empathy, and allowing students opportunities to engage in social issues and come up with solutions to real-world problems. Ford insists that we must challenge gifted students through multicultural education at the highest level of Bloom's taxonomy. So if you look at the Bloom-Banks matrix, it will show you ways that you can adjust your multicultural instruction to meet those higher levels of Bloom's taxonomy for your gifted students. And finally, schools need to make stronger efforts to develop partnerships with diverse families. It's important that schools inform parents that gifted services are even provided at their school. Schools need to be proactive and go into those diverse communities, whether it's visiting homes or attending minority-sponsored events, or just seeking support of diverse churches and organizations. And we need to make an effort to educate diverse families through workshops and meetings at our schools. In conclusion, assessments are a major problem for identifying culturally diverse gifted students, but they are not the root of the problem. Deficit thinking ignores the strengths of the culturally diverse, and educators fail to understand the diverse forms of giftedness. Until schools can broaden the definition of giftedness, prepare educators to integrate multicultural education, and utilize more than one qualifier for determining giftedness, the trend of underrepresentation will continue. So that's about it. Thank you so much for tuning in, and I hope you enjoyed it.